Nobody wants to talk about an exit strategy. It's not what it's about. It's about the adventure. It's about what's going on in the peripheral. It's not about what's going on at the end of the tunnel. I've thrown away those myopic eye shades that I had for 20 plus years as a sales trader / market maker, because the drive behind making the dollar back then was so different than it is for me now.
Welcome to the Drift Podcast, where we delve deep into the dynamic world of investment philosophy and market insights that evolve as fluidly as life itself. Rather than aggressively pursuing and conquering opportunities, we navigate through markets with a keen sense of timing, seizing opportunities as they arise and focusing on the journey rather than the destination. Rejecting static models like modern portfolio theory, we embrace a versatile tackle box approach to handle market shifts and adversity adeptly. Our foundational principles encompass central bank policy, Austrian economics, history, game theory, Gevakal's 3 key prices, geopolitics, narrative analysis, and anonymity. With these tools, we chart a course through the ever-shifting investment landscape with a broad peripheral view. We prioritize ethical decision-making, emphasizing what ought to be done over what should be done. Inefficiencies create opportunities. Our poise and patience balance subjective thought with intuition and insight. Guided by subjectivity and pragmatism, we champion the journey over the destination. Here's to valuing the means and the journey while letting the ends care for themselves. And with that, I'm your host, Tom DiOro, and I am honored and excited to be joined by Britt Huycke, President and CFO of Smart Capital Incorporated. Britt is a 25-year veteran of Wall Street. He served as Vice President, Institutional Sales Trader, and Market Maker on the trading desk of Roth Capital Partners from 1999 through 2021. Before working in finance, Britt had a career on the maritime front, handling private sports fishing boats from 1987 until 1996. He left his hometown of Newport Beach, California, for Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and Florida. Britt's also the co-founder of Wolf Capital Media, which he founded with partner Matt Lopez in 2023. Britt's also the author of Exiled on Wall Street, a Substack publication based on his transition from Marlin fishing to trading on Wall Street, and The Bridge, a Beehive publication that combines his experience in traditional financial markets with that of digital currencies. Feel free to visit the website, smartcapitalbroker.com. Again, that's smartcapitalbroker.com. Britt, after that lengthy introduction for all your achievements, accomplishments, welcome to your show. Thank you very much. It's an honor to talk with you about this.
Tom, thank you very much for having me. This is, I assume, is going to be a blast, and another one of those adventures on the drift. Sorry for the lengthy description there. It's funny. I left out 3 years, from, I think it was 96 to 99. I actually went and got an education. I went and attended Chapman University in City of Orange in Southern California and got an BSBA, Bachelor of Science in Business Administration. So there's a transition there that I do believe is somewhat important, because I did get some kind of documentation, some kind of credentials that show that I went through the traditional education process.
Britt, The Drift, that's the name of the show, is The Drift.
Yes.
Can you share with your audience briefly how you came about that name and how it's relative and relevant to investment and education for investment?
All right. It works both metaphorically and literally. You mentioned in the introduction, earlier part of my life, first half of my life, I worked on boats. I worked in the luxurious life of sport fishing, and I ran and crewed various privately owned vessels, primarily in Mexico and Central America. I did do a great deal of fishing in my local waters off Newport Beach in my youth in the 70s and some in the 80s. But part of the trick of the trade was I was paid to find fish. I was paid to put people on fish, and that required some diligence on my behalf. And the stress was always there as to whether or not I was going to deliver for those folks, what high spot to go to, what bank to go to. And this could be in various countries off various coastlines, right? You get to know them pretty well. You use nautical charts, you know where the high spots are. Now, my favorite thing to do when we would get the owners of the boats off, or folks that had chartered, was to get off of the big boat that was usually anywhere from 60, 70 feet over to over 100 feet. And I'd get in the ponga, or the skiff, the launch, and I would throw a couple of different fishing rods in there: a spinning rod, a trolling rod, a bait casting rod, a tackle box with various forms of tackle, anything from poppers to obviously bear hooks, because I might have some bait in the bait tank as well, just a mix. And I would motor into the shoreline, and I would do a drift, a proverbial drift along the beach, wherever I was. Sometimes it was a beach I was very familiar with, and sometimes it wasn't. New digs, new haunts, so to speak. And I would do it alone. Then I would cut the outboard, and I would drift, and I would let the current take me where it would, and see what fish presented themselves, what might pop up. And of course, I had various forms of tackle, so I was prepared for whatever might surface. And sometimes you were drifting over sand, sometimes you're approaching structure, reef, rocks, and all that kind of stuff. But I would let the current take me where I was going to go. I didn't use any of my own subjective processing. There's a concept of letting my higher power take over and seeing where it would take me. So that was that metaphoric. That was literally, and then I figured out a way to use it metaphorically when I entered the world of Wall Street, which I had never expected to do. I couldn't believe that I went from bouncing up and down the latitudes of the northern hemisphere, from Washington State all the way down to the Panamanian Colombian border, to one day walking through the streets of Manhattan, visiting hedge funds and mutual fund companies and all the high rises, and hanging out on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and the curb, the affectionate name of the American Stock Exchange, which no longer exists. Crazy transition from one to the other. So hopefully that wasn't too long, but that's the essence of the drift. And I will obviously talk about it on a metaphorical basis as well as we get into
this. Love this. Transitioning from the sea to stocks. Obviously, you set this relevancy. How excited are you about going, wait a minute, this life experience transitions to the world of investment as well? Wow. How are they so connected?
It's in the strangest way. I want to say I stumbled upon it. When I went to work in this new environment, I was hired by a firm called Crutton and Roth. And it's a boutique investment bank headquartered in Newport Beach, my hometown where I was born and raised, California. And when I was at Chapman University, I was selected to go with 9 other top tier students to go to Manhattan during a Christmas break in '98, or holiday break, and interview with some top tier firms there. And when I was there, I remembered, oh my God, the Cruttons have a bank back in Newport. What am I doing? I know the Cruttons. When I got back to Newport, I still had I had more than a fair amount of school. No, I had a fair amount of school left. I think I had a little more than a semester. I thought maybe I'll go knock on the Cruttons' doors. Now, the reality of the situation was, at that time, I was married to my first wife. She was from Central America. We met and married in Honduras. She had convinced me to leave the sport fishing world and go get a college degree, because if I have a degree as a gringo, they will take me much more seriously in Central America. So I thought, okay. And she was from a very, very solid and sound family. Her dad was actually one of the chief economists for the Central American Bank. Oh, the irony. So in any case, I went and knocked on the door at Crutton and found out that Walter Crutton, the founder of the firm, was in the process of leaving, so I better not use his name. But I had some other resources to get in. It took three months. They finally hired me. I was still at Chapman University. I was yet to graduate, but I was old, right? I think I was 31 by this time, because I'm starting a second stage of my life. And I was eventually hired on 90-day probationary status. I had to find a place for myself within the firm. So all of a sudden it looked like maybe we aren't going to return to Honduras, and maybe I'm going to find a spot at the shop. And the one spot that had an open desk where I could sit and study for my Series 7 and 63 and the like was on the trading desk. And having just come back from Manhattan and visiting a couple of the larger trading desks, no way in hell do I want to work there. Everybody yells at each other. And looks like they're going to get in fist fights, etc. So I had no desire, but that's where I sat. And so looking for a place elsewhere in the firm during those first 30 days, one of the head traders realized that I was the first guy in and the last guy out every day. And so I came in one morning and they said, we're giving you a permanent seat here. And everybody hated me because I was about 3 years younger than them and just starting the business. And these guys are getting closer to retirement age, so to speak, because you start early in trading. If you do well enough, you can get out early. And this one individual by the name of Greg T, I don't know if I'm allowed to use full names on here. So Greg T, who was about 3 inches taller than me, kept screaming he wasn't going to be my wet nurse, eventually moved himself right next to my seat. So I don't know if he saw potential in me or if he just wanted to pick on me. But one morning I came in and I had messed around on my computer the night before looking at charts and looking for stocks in our research universe that had broken above their 200-day moving average. And the only reason why I did this is because I used to love nautical charts. And I used the nautical charts when I was getting to a new location, like I'm fishing Coiba for the first time off of Panama. And I've got my nautical charts that'll show me where the pinnacles are, where the high spots are, right? So they got charts here on this trading desk in this financial wizardry world. And so I thought I'd give those, try to figure out these charts. And something breaking above a 200-day moving average made sense to me. Maybe it's peeking its ugly little head up. And so I walked in one morning with the list of all the Roth research names that had traded above the 200 moving day in the last 2 weeks or whatever. And Greg T said, well done. And from that point on, that guy was my mentor for a number of months. And they told me it would take a while to learn the language. I would be somebody's clerk for a while. And I thought there's no problem learning another language. I had to learn Spanish. I learned trading. We have our own language in trading. I'm sorry, in fishing, we have our own language. And so it was easy. Problem is if you mess up that trading language, the other guy on the phone or anybody else on the desk knows it. And you could really regret that in the long term. And bottom line, Tom, I'm sorry for the long answer. I found the immediate connection in doing research through a visual, and that was the nautical charts versus the stock charts. And so all of a sudden I started to see, wait, this is like fishing. And then so over the course of maybe the next 18 months, I tried to bridge that gap. I tried to utilize everything that I had done on my fishing days and bring it into trading stocks, which might sound a little bit crazy, but it made sense. And the other beauty of it was all the buy-side traders, the folks on the other side of the phone, when I was first introduced to them, they didn't want to have anything to do with me. But when they found out that I used to pull on 500-pound blue marlin, chase wahoo, chase dorado, chase sailfish, tuna, all of a sudden I had an in. It was a great conversation opener, and people wanted to listen to me. And next thing you know, I'm on the road visiting accounts in Boston, visiting accounts in New York, San Francisco. And the lead almost every time was my former fishing days, because a lot of these people liked to fish or had an idea of what it was. They wanted to hear the stories. So it made sense to bridge a gap and find any metaphorical aspect between fishing and trading.
Outstanding. We're talking today with Britt Huycke, President and CFO of Smart Capital Incorporated. For more information, feel free to visit smartcapitalbroker.com. That's smartcapitalbroker.com. You're listening to the Drift Podcast, empowered by Smart Capital Broker. Britt, that transition and the relevancy of that transition, was there a point where you formalized the process or the system to stock trading?
That's actually a great question, because it was a secret I kept to myself. I didn't want my peers to understand what I saw, because obviously there's an advantage to having an edge. And the most honest answer to that question, Tom, is I didn't try to capitalize on it until after I left Roth Capital, which was 23 plus years later. And that's when I started. I went through a personal shift as well. It wasn't just leaving a firm of 23 years, but I went through a process where I cleaned up my lifestyle. I got healthy. I was reaching that midlife section. And in doing so, I started putting pen to paper to symbolize the metaphorical transition that I had gone through for the past 2+ decades. And in doing so, I started up a small gig with a very dear friend of mine, and we called it Drift Partners. And that's where the Drift Manifesto came from. And so, again, I started putting everything from pen to paper there. And to go back to your original question, I never really let anybody know. When I was on the sell side for all those years, I never let anybody knew what my thought process was. Is that a good enough answer? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does.
Right. Yep.
Yes, it does. It really clarifies it.
The interesting thing is when I knew I was leaving my firm, I was going to leave the firm earlier than I had planned. I was going to quit 2 weeks earlier, but I found out that somebody on the desk was taking a vacation, and I didn't want to leave the head of the desk shorthanded. This was during COVID, by the way, and I was required to work from home because I wouldn't get vaccinated. And that was a part of the catalyst for me to make another shift in my life. I was in prime shape for the first time in a long time, physically and mentally. I didn't want the vaccination, not to get political. Just didn't want it. The weekend that I wrote my resignation letter, or what I thought would be my resignation letter, I opened up a Substack account. And for those that aren't familiar with Substack, it's a publishing platform. And I ran across it because some sell-side research analysts had left their investment banks that they worked for and branched out on their own. They're writing their own research, and they get to keep 90% of the monies that come into them. So I started a letter called Exiled on Wall Street. And that name has at least 3 significant reasons for its utility. I'll leave that to the side unless you want to ask about it later. Some of it's funny. And I published my resignation letter on Substack. It wasn't a resignation letter so much as it was just a declaration. And so I was going to play around with that for a while. I love to write. I love to read. I published a couple of trite, ridiculous, but fun essays over the span of 12 months. I was approached by another individual by the name of Matt Lopez, who I had met this individual because he was in the Bitcoin mining space and worked with one of my closest and oldest friends, Chris Krutinen. You might recognize that name because Krutinen was the name of the bank that I originally went to work for. So Chris and Matt and some other individuals had a mining outfit. They were mining Bitcoin and Ethereum. And we always talked about the fact that someday I would end up working with them. Those discussions were taking place when I was still employed at Roth Capital. In any case, all that stuff went down with Sam Blankman-Fried and FTX and all that kind of stuff. We never put anything together, but Matt Lopez, one of his partners, approached me and said, look, let's do something. Let's do a traditional hedge fund. Let's figure out what we can do together. I love talking to you. We love talking at Austrian economics, which is tied in very well into Bitcoin, et cetera. And so we started up our own partnership. And about 4 months into that partnership, we opened a small hedge fund. Keep that to the side. Nothing exciting there. But we expanded our business and started a C Corp, small media outfit that was all Matt's idea, called Wolfcat Media. And I'm not big on media, which is so interesting to be talking to you right now, Tom. I know I met you a year ago and I might have even said, media. But that's about the time Matt and I were starting up the business. He wanted to do podcasting. He wanted to get the YouTube stuff going. He wanted to try to process and sell my content. And so it's him and Hod back and forth. He got back thick into the Bitcoin world last summer because did he have the whisper that Bitcoin was going to get the regulatory approval for ETFs? I don't know. But he wanted to take money out of the small hedge fund we have and start working with crypto again, which I said, please do, because you're very well versed in it. So we now sit today that Wolfcat Media still exists, and it's been my primary focus for the last 12 months. I write outside of the Exiled on Wall Street letter. I write one for Cat Media called The Bridge, and it's a Beehive publication. And The Bridge is about my transition between traditional markets and the digital currency markets. I think you mentioned this all in the opening gist. And the crazy thing is talking about some of the stuff with Matt about his frustration with small caps, which is my background as far as equities are concerned. What he saw for a transition back into crypto for him, Bitcoin and Ethereum specifically, made sense. And so when I met the individuals that I'm now involved with at Smart Capital, that would primarily be Richard O'Connor. He and I had been talking about some other stuff in the past. We had an avenue to trade Forex currencies. And I thought, God, you could apply the same considerations that Matt was thinking with crypto to Forex. And Forex, I know. Forex, I know. I love geopolitics. I follow central bank policy. I love trying to figure out what way currencies are going to go, so to speak. Not very familiar with the emerging market currencies, but when it comes to the US dollar, the euro, the yen, it's a safe place. As I was saying to my partner Richard in Smart Capital, it's the honest man's market. I know that sounds strange because when you think about what happened to Putin there in 2022, when we decided to sanction him for crossing that border into Ukraine, our government did everything it could to clog up the financial plumbing, which did all kinds of interesting things in the currency world. Of course, for the umpteenth time in the last 40 years, people are wondering if the U.S. dollar will retain that reserve currency status. But all that stuff, all those little puzzles I love. And so it was really easy for me to get drawn into this Forex opportunity with these guys. And it's just another day. It's another day on the drift, right? It's another day of fishing. I can bring it all the way back to my literal experience on that little ponga when I was doing the drift. I brought a bunch of different tackle because I didn't know it was going to present itself. Here I am now in the Forex world because I'm done with small caps, right? Changing the tackle box, so to speak. Or not changing the tackle box is the forever element. But
I love that. The forever element.
and
We're talking today.
Pardon?
Oh, I was going to reintroduce you, Britt. I still am.
Okay.
We're talking today with Britt Huycke, President and CFO of Smart Capital Incorporated. For more information, you can visit smartcapitalbroker.com. That's smartcapitalbroker.com. As you were saying, Britt, that tackle box remains the same. Carry on, please. The permanent element of it all.
It's all right. I guess how do I get, because again, the tackle box was literal for me in the fishing world, and it's metaphorical for me in the world of finance or the world of Wall Street. So okay, I'll draw back to some of the stuff you mentioned in the intro. You mentioned some of the things that I like to use. I love Austrian economics. I'll start off with that one. As I also pointed out, I didn't go to college until I was an adult, right? But all the years that I was at sea, all the years that I was on boats, every time I would come back to the States, I would load up on books and throw them on the boat. And the ones that were already on the boat that I already read, I'd put them in a storage unit that I maintain in Newport Beach. And so I'd never shied away from education. So I don't want to say I'm self-taught because the world has taught me everything that I've learned. I have nothing to do with it. I keep the trap door open and suck in whatever is presented to me. Again, part of the drift. But I did, quote unquote, teach myself such things as Austrian economics, study philosophy extensively, primarily ethics, because I thought that ethics was a part of economics, which now that I'm 57 years old, I don't necessarily agree with that. It's weird because I was on boats and the world was my oyster to the extent that I'm not staring at a TV every night. You're always in it, or quite often in a new environment. There's inspiration all around you. So my tackle, that metaphorical tackle box that I maintain now, it's all upstairs in the brain, in my mind, but it also surrounds me with the people I interact with. They're all pages in that library, so to speak. Now I'm talking about going from tackle box to library. But so the interesting thing about stepping away from Roth Capital, now I could utilize the stuff that I always wanted to use at the trading desk that didn't fit. I know that I drove my coworkers nuts, always touting Austrian economics over Keynesian economics. And these guys didn't want to hear this stuff. They wanted to talk about the sporting events over the weekend and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't fit into that aspect. I wanted to talk about game theory. I wanted to talk about, again, the good old Austrian school. Unfortunately, I still buried my head too thick in politics back then, and nobody wanted to hear it. So when I started this drift in November 2021, and it's done nothing but expand, I get to utilize all the stuff that nobody wanted to hear about. It's going back to those secrets of the trade, right, Tom? What I've been fortunate with so far in the last 12 months is some of the resources that I was utilizing, paid for subscriptions and all that kind of stuff. Because I was outside of the sell side, I was no longer in a sell side institution. I was somewhat freed up with who I would talk to. I've been able to meet some of the individuals that I've been following for the past 20 plus years. One of them is a guy named John Marlin, and I started sucking in information immediately when I started working on the trading desk because I was scared that I would look like a moron and didn't understand what all these people were talking about. Now, I'd mentioned I had a significant background in Austrian economics, but I oddly, one of the first services I ran into was John Malden. And so I was getting his weekly Saturday letter for free. He started offering a subscription service, and I bought into that. I got to meet him last year. I did a couple of Zoom calls with him, and actually he was involved with an oil company that we slightly got involved with last fall, Matt and myself, with Wolf Capital. And so it's why I'm here. That's how I met you, right? Where does the drift take me next? I have no idea. The whole process about this, and you stated this as well in the opening statement, it's all about the means, and it has nothing to do with the end. For 20 plus years in my Wall Street seat, all I cared about was the goal, the end, what was up ahead. And I paid zero attention to what was going on around me, unless what was going on around me had immediate financial implication to me. Now, when I was in the maritime, when I was on the boats, it was always about the means. So basically, bringing forth the drift in 2021 in the writings, it brought that natural aspect back to my life, and that concept of the means. And I started this new endeavor. Somebody recently asked something about an exit strategy, and nobody wants to talk about an exit strategy. It's not what it's about. It's about the adventure. It's about what's going on in the peripheral. It's not about what's going on at the end of the tunnel. I've thrown away those myopic eye shades that I had for 20 plus years as a sales trader / market maker, because the drive behind making the dollar back then was so different than it is for me now, and more freedom, so to speak. And the interesting thing about this investment process that we're utilizing, it's literally the drift. It's the same thing that my partner Matt, was talking about with crypto, but it's also definitively what these individuals are doing with foreign exchange. And instead of employing specific structural investment theories on you mentioned something earlier about modern portfolio theory. This is a capitalized opportunity. Again, to bring back the metaphor of fishing. When we were out fishing the big game, we were pulling jigs, but we also had a bait tank full of bait, and sometimes that bait tank had cabbies in it, sometimes it had greenies in it, sometimes it had, this is before tuna tubes, for those folks out there that know what tuna tubes are. We used to catch like 4-pound, 6-pound skipjack, and we'd run a saltwater hose through their mouth while we bridled them up with a hook, and we put them out as live bait, right? Whatever worked, whatever we were using for bait, because we saw what fish were around. It's the same thing with this Forex opportunity. You don't have to do the same thing every day. You get to capitalize on what's being presented in the marketplace. So part of the reason why this investment vehicle, for lack of a better name, is intriguing to me is because it shifts every day. And it's not necessarily long-term investing. In fact, it isn't long-term investing. When it was first introduced to me, they were talking about compounding. You don't do compounding in trading. You do compounding in a savings account, et cetera, et cetera. But now I see how you can utilize this concept, and it's interesting. We can get a pretty decent payout without where it doesn't seem like we're taking the risk to get the payout that we are realizing, because you're trading Forex, right? You're not trading those volatile micro caps or small caps that might be up 15% in one day because there's a buyer in the crowd and no liquidity. But there is true. It is fair. It is a fair return to risk, because you're in and out of the market a lot more often than you traditionally would be in Forex. And I'll cut that off there. I don't know how deep we want to go into the investment theory today. I would rather people inquire about that. But anything you want to know specifically, obviously I'm here to shed some light on it.
Britt, before we close our first maiden voyage episode, what would you like to share that we may not have touched on during this fabulous show?
I guess it might be something on a personal note. Life took an interesting turn for me 4.5 years ago. And the one thing I can say to everyone out there, all right, put it in more realistic terms. My days on Wall Street, objectivism, reason, individualism, selfishness as a virtue was the center of my life. And I could justify it with specific aspects of philosophy that I had studied earlier in life, I was fortunate enough to study under an individual by the name of Tibor Machan, who held the same ethical belief that I did. It's called ethical egoism, and selfishness is not a byproduct of it, it's a core of it. And I realize now, as I'm hitting the second half of my life, life is purely subjective. Quantum physics tells it so. Probabilities are real, and I've always loved probabilities. Chance is real, luck is real, and there's no reason why I can't be a friend with anybody on the planet. I'm tired of differences. I'm tired of positions, if that makes any sense. And I ran into this concept of a drift through a higher power, handing something over to something greater than myself and letting it, and then capitalizing off of whatever it is that higher power, be it the current, be it the marketplace. Actually, it's scary to call the marketplace a higher power, but I just have this crazy sense of freedom by not trying to control everything around me. So if there's a message in any of this, it's part of a program that I'm a part of where surrender is a big deal. And we deem surrender, Western society deems surrender a negative thing. And we always laugh at the French. And I don't know why we laugh at the French, because they're pretty incredible people. But surrender to me is the direct translation of it is freedom. And so here I sit with you, with Tom, and here I sit virtually with a whole bunch of people I'll never meet, and perhaps some I will. And I just have a different respect for humanity. And I know that this isn't directly supposed to be the message of a financial podcast, but I have an extremely significant amount of respect for humanity that I didn't have 5 years ago. And if I don't agree with you, so what? If you don't agree with me, it doesn't bother me. I hope it doesn't bother you. And that's it.
Britt, it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you as a guest on the show that's derived from your name. I'm honored to host it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was interesting. I can't believe I've done a podcast now, and it's a pleasure. And I've really enjoyed talking to you in the past couple of weeks, and I look forward to many more opportunities like this, and maybe eventually I'll figure out how this all works, and it'll make more sense to everybody.
And you've done and are doing terrific, Britt. Thank you very much. You've been listening to the Drift podcast, powered by Smart Capital Incorporated. I'm Tom DiOro. Today's guest was Britt Huycke, President and CFO of Smart Capital Incorporated. Britt is a 25-year veteran of Wall Street. He served as Vice President, Institutional Sales Trader, and Market Maker on the trading desk of Roth Capital Partners. For more information, feel free to visit smartcapitalbroker.com. Again, smartcapitalbroker.com. The Drift podcast is recorded in Newport Beach, California, and on location. Today, our chief recording engineer is Stephen Blanton. For more intel, not just information, email us at podcasts@smartcapitalbroker.com. Thank you for listening.